The man was about to be bitten to death by the grizzly bear, but instead of running away, he endured the pain and lay on the ground pretending to be dead, allowing the bear to bite his body. He knew that only after the bear got bored might he have a slim chance of survival, but how could the brutal grizzly bear be so easily fooled? The bear lifted its massive paw and pressed it heavily on the man's head. Despite the excruciating headache from being stepped on, the man tried his best to control himself, not daring to make a sound. But the playful grizzly bear did not intend to let him go. The grizzly bear bit the man's cotton jacket and lifted him up, swinging him back and forth in the air like a rag doll. Even so, the man still did not dare to make a sound. Seeing the man completely collapse on the ground like a lifeless object, the bear, after pressing on him a few more times, finally lost interest and turned away. Unexpectedly, just as the man had narrowly escaped death, he immediately started having other reckless thoughts. Seeing the bear still wandering nearby, the man gritted his teeth, propped up his upper body with his arms, and dragged his injured body towards the direction of the gun. He endured the excruciating pain to pick up the hunting rifle from the ground, his whole body trembling as he used all his strength to aim the muzzle at the grizzly bear. However, not only did the shot have no effect, but it also instantly enraged the bear. Roaring, it swung its powerful claws and slashed the man's throat, plunging him once again into endless torment. Please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, share, and support Mingjing with donations. Seeing that the man was completely motionless, the brown bear reluctantly left. However, animals are just animals, always falling for human tricks. Seeing the brown bear fall for it again, the man did not learn from the previous lesson. He mustered all his strength to pull out the dagger from his chest, slowly lifted his head, and stared intently at the brown bear. As expected, the enraged brown bear charged directly at the man, intending to tear apart this fearless human. The man swung the dagger, repeatedly stabbing the brown bear. Fortunately, he was lucky enough to stab the bear's heart directly. In a flash, both the man and the bear tumbled down the slope, completely motionless. It is unknown how much time passed before his teammates found their way here. As everyone worked together to turn over the brown bear's body, they were completely shocked by the scene before them. At this moment, the man lay weakly on the ground, barely clinging to life. No one knew how he had survived. Everyone hurriedly helped to bandage him, but the man's body was riddled with wounds. Even the experienced team medic was at a loss, only able to pick up a needle and thread to stitch the man's torn skin together, like mending a piece of torn cloth. To prevent the man's wounds from becoming infected, the captain used the last remaining bottle of alcohol to disinfect him. However, after seeing the captain's actions, team member Fitz believed that the captain was wasting resources. In this remote wilderness, without any medication, even a deity couldn't save the man. Instead of wasting everyone's time, it would be better to let him go sooner. Although the captain understood this reasoning, he couldn't abandon any of his brothers who had faced life and death with him, so he decided to set up camp here for the night, and wait until the man's condition stabilized before moving on. But by the next day, the man not only fell into a coma, but also developed a high fever. In truth, everyone understood in their hearts. In this condition, the man probably wouldn't last much longer, and the team was constantly being hunted by the natives. Coupled with the already rugged mountain paths, which were made even more impassable by the heavy snow, if they continued to carry this burden, even if they weren't killed by the natives, they would freeze to death in the impending blizzard. Captain, you aren't doing us any favors by letting him continue to suffer like this. Haven't seen the same up here. No, you're going to have to go back. Find another way. Another way. For the safety of the entire team, the captain had to make a difficult decision. Then the captain raised the hunting rifle and aimed it at the man, but he just couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger.
Bonus in the Rocky Mountain Fur Company to the 2 men who stayed back with Glass to see this through.
Faye, who had just been impatient about the money, surprisingly volunteered to stay with the man's son, expressing his intention to accompany the man with dignity on his final journey.
Glass is to be careful as long as necessary and ensure a proper burial when it's time. He's earned it.
Understand. Unexpectedly, after the team had only been gone for 1 night, Fitz couldn't wait to start digging the grave, but after another 3 days, not only did the man not die, his condition even improved. With no other choice, Fitz came up with a plan to send the other 2 away, and then he began to manipulate the man.
They're so close now I could smell them. I know you can smell them too, and you have to think. You have to think of your boy. Kill all of us. No, not Grandma's head. Save your boy in blank. You just have to blink.
Although the man didn't want to die, he blinked to save his son. Fitz immediately tied him up with a rope and forcefully covered his mouth and nose. Fortunately, the man's son arrived in time, striking Fitz with the butt of a rifle to keep him away from his father. However, the ruthless Fitz had already noticed that the boy didn't dare to shoot, so he took advantage of the boy's distraction to snatch the rifle, then quickly pinned him against a tree and stabbed him hard in the chest. Watching his son being killed, the man glared with wide eyes. his face contorted with rage, and his whole body trembled uncontrollably. He wished he could tear him apart from the past, but now he could only helplessly lie on the stretcher, watching as the other hid his son's body. Then, Fitz grabbed the man's legs, preparing to drag him into the pit to bury him alive. What was even more infuriating was that Fitz only buried him halfway before making his escape, deliberately leaving the man's head exposed for beasts to gnaw on. However, he underestimated a father's will. After a night, not only did the man not die, but he also used unimaginable determination to break free from his restraints and slowly crawled out of the pit. He dragged his heavy body to his son's corpse, gently placing his forehead against his son's cold cheek. He wanted to cry but couldn't shed a tear, wanted to shout but couldn't make a sound. Although he was nearly crippled at this point, he was determined to personally kill that man to avenge his son. Immediately he gathered whatever he could use and began searching for food, because before seeking revenge, the man had to find a way to survive in this cold and dangerous wilderness. Later, he followed the stench to find a cow bone that had been gnawed clean by wild animals. He smashed the bone, dug out the foul-smelling marrow, and without hesitation, stuffed it into his mouth. Although it was hard to swallow, he had to eat it to replenish his strength. But being alone and in such a broken state, surviving in the wilderness was no easy task. Even drinking water was a problem for him now. The moment he swallowed, the water mixed with clotted blood flowed out from his wounds, and the intense pain nearly choked him. Yet he had to endure it to quickly replenish his body's water supply. The man had no choice but to pour out gunpowder, apply it to the wound, and then light dry grass to ignite the gunpowder. Such a reckless act. Who else could do it? He recuperated by the river for a few days, surviving on wild grass and carrion. He carved the names of his enemies on a stone to remind himself not to forget his hatred, using it as motivation to stay alive. At this moment, the sound of hooves in the distance filled the man with immense fear. It turned out that the natives had tracked him down, based on the traces he left behind. To save his life, the man hurriedly hid in the water, hoping to avoid being seen, but unexpectedly, the traces he left behind led to this place. To survive, the man hurriedly hid in the water, hoping to avoid being seen, but unexpectedly, he was still discovered. No. Listen over there. The opponent relentlessly shot arrows at the man, who could only dive into the icy river to evade the poisonous arrows. Although the wound felt like it was being torn apart by the soaking river water, he had to endure the pain, no matter how intense it was. When the man finally surfaced, he discovered an endless series of waterfalls ahead. The next second, the rapid current swept him away. Fortunately, the man's clothing was thick enough, preventing him from being smashed to death in the riverbed. The man struggled desperately to keep the water from flooding into his mouth. Luckily, in his panic, he managed to grab onto a piece of driftwood, which saved him from drowning. However, compared to the rapids, what awaited him on the shore was even more terrifying. If the man, soaked to the skin, didn't warm up quickly, he would soon freeze to death. To survive, the man had no choice but to gather some dry grass. Then he used a flint to try to start a fire for warmth. However, the flint had long been soaked by the river water, and it wasn't until nightfall that the man finally managed to ignite the dry grass. But the bad news didn't stop there. Due to the soaking in the river, the wound on the man's shoulder began to fester, and coupled with the long period without food, avenging his son was out of the question. Even surviving was a challenge. To obtain food, he used stones to create a circle by the riverbank, and when fish entered the trap, the man grabbed one and began eating it raw. After eating and drinking his fill, the man set off again. There was still a long way to go to reach the camp, and he had to race against time. After walking for an unknown amount of time, a wild plain suddenly appeared, with a herd of bison frantically fleeing as a pack of wolves gathered to attack one of them, fully displaying the natural law of survival of the fittest. The man stayed put, hoping that after the wolves had eaten their fill, they would leave quickly, so he could scavenge some food. However, when he awoke from a doze, he found that someone else had beaten him to it. An indigenous person was using fire to drive away the wolves, and then sat on the ground eating raw beef. The man, so hungry that his stomach was sticking to his back, hurriedly walked over, hoping to get a share. Unexpectedly, as he approached, the indigenous person suddenly raised a bow and arrow. The man quickly raised his hands and knelt on the ground, then hurriedly lay down, gesturing to show that he was no threat, and just wanted some food. Seeing his humility, the indigenous person threw him a piece of raw beef liver, covered in dirty blood. The man, suffering from hunger and cold, couldn't care about the rawness, and quickly grabbed the liver, taking a big bite. But the next second, the strong bloody taste made him vomit uncontrollably. The indigenous person watching this scene had a look of disdain, as if mocking the man's cowardice. But to his surprise, the man quickly grabbed the beef liver again and started eating it with relish. He raised his head and fearlessly made eye contact with the indigenous person, like a fierce wolf defending its right to survive in a desperate situation. The man's ferocity earned him respect. Early the next morning, the indigenous person lifted the man's clothes, saw his shocking wounds, and after learning about his ordeal from the man, felt a sense of admiration for him. Not only did he help treat the man's wounds with herbal medicine, he also proactively invited the man to travel together. But the good times didn't last long. A blizzard hit, and the man's wound reopened from the cold, causing him to collapse. The indigenous person gathered a pile of branches to build a shelter for him, and helped to stitch up his wound again. When the blizzard passed, the man woke up to find the indigenous person missing. He followed the footprints and eventually discovered the indigenous person hanged in the forest, with a sign hanging on him that read in French, "We are all savages," before the man could even grieve. He discovered a group of French people not far away. Realizing the danger, the man quickly hid behind a tree, not daring to make a sound until the others let their guard down. Only then did the man slowly approach the corral, intending to steal a horse to leave this troubled place. But at that moment, a Frenchman was dragging a female indigenous person, attempting to commit an atrocity. He was pulling a native woman with the intention of committing an indecent act. The man, unable to bear it, crawled behind the Frenchman, picked up the hunting rifle, and rushed forward to subdue him. The Frenchman quickly realized something was wrong and started gathering over here. The man swiftly fired the gun to create chaos, allowing the native woman to escape in the opposite direction amidst the confusion. The man successfully stole a horse and also set the other horses free. Not giving the Frenchman a chance to track him, he spent the night in the forest. Unexpectedly, the next day, the Frenchman caught up with him and launched an attack. With no time to think, the man jumped onto the horse and began to flee for his life, but the opponents had already surrounded him. It wasn't long before they forced him to the edge of a cliff. The branches and snow cushioned his fall, allowing the man to escape with his life. However, the horse was not so lucky and died instantly upon hitting the rocks. Worse, a snowstorm began to blow through the forest, signaling a blizzard. To avoid freezing to death, the man had to cut open the horse's belly, remove entrails, and then strip off his clothes to crawl inside, using its warmth to keep himself alive. Though brutal, he had no other choice to survive. Luckily, after the night passed, as sunlight filtered through the forest, the surrounding temperature began to rise gradually, and the man, hidden inside the horse's carcass, managed to survive once again. Immediately after, the man crawled out of the horse's belly, put his clothes back on, and once again set out on his path of revenge. Braving the biting cold wind, he crossed the vast snowy plains, with the belief in revenge making him stronger. He repeatedly wrote the name of the murderer, which was the only motivation keeping him alive. After an unknown amount of time, the man finally managed to find his team, and everyone was shocked, unable to believe that he was still alive. Then, with the little consciousness he had left, the man revealed the truth. Fitz had killed his son and thrown him into a pit, leaving him to die. The captain, filled with immense anger, instructed his teammates to take the man back, while he returned to the camp ahead of them to confront Fitz. However, the cunning Fitz was already nowhere to be found, and had taken the money from the captain's safe. With the situation as it was, the captain could only advise the man to make plans after he recovered from his injuries. But the man had held on until now, solely to avenge his son, and with his enemy having escaped, he had no desire to stay there any longer. Seeing that the man was determined, the captain decided to join him in tracking down the killer. Following the footprints on the ground, they quickly pursued into the forest. Smelling the scent of smoke in the air, the man was certain that Fitz was nearby, so they decided to flank him from the east and west sides to capture him. Soon, the captain was the first to find Fitz. Hearing the gunshot, the man immediately rushed to provide support. Seeing the captain on the ground with his scalp removed, the man knew that Fitz was trying to create an illusion, making him think he was dealing with indigenous people, hoping he would retreat. So, the man decided to use this to his advantage. He cut a branch, dug a trap, and waited for his son's killer to fall into it. He secured the captain to the horse's back with the trimmed branch, while he lay on the back of another horse. As expected, a dark gun barrel appeared on the hillside. As the gunshot rang out, the man on the horse fell to the ground. When Fitz rode down to check, he realized he had fallen into a trap. Thank you for watching. Fitz fled into the woods in a panic, while the man looked at the sand, his enemy so close, and let out a hysterical roar. Then he took a rifle from the horse and hurriedly chased after him. The two exchanged bullets in the woods, neither gaining the upper hand. Fitz, like a frightened prey, accidentally rolled down the slope. Immediately, the man leapt down, but the rifle suddenly fell. Just then the man jumped down, but his long spear suddenly fell. Run! At this moment, Fitz no longer ran away. He knew that what was meant to come would eventually come, so he faced it calmly. Ah. They wrestled with each other. Neither of them was better. But soon, the man seized the opportunity, gripping his opponent's arm and driving the blade into Fitz's chest. Just as the man was about to finish off this beast himself, the sound of hooves echoed from a distance, and the ever-present indigenous people were approaching. Faced with the jungle's law of the survival of the fittest, the man had no choice but to throw his enemy into the river, letting the indigenous people finish it. As the herd of horses slowly approached, the man slumped to the ground, quietly waiting for death to arrive. Surprisingly, the indigenous people did not attack the man. It turned out that the woman he had saved from the Frenchman was actually the daughter of the tribal chief. However, the look in her eyes was still filled with hostility. Perhaps sparing him was just a way to repay the favor of saving her life.